Life or reality can be looked at like a movie. We become so identified with the actor on the screen, we jump when the monster appears. When we jump, we realize we're sitting in the seat eating popcorn. It takes a jolt. Law of attraction says the actor is what controls the action through intention. It's actually the writer and director of the movie, or self, that controls the action for the benefit of the observer in the audience. The actor is just the puppet in a puppet show. The law. First, there can be no true enlightenment and transcendent perception without knowing the law. Again, there can be no true enlightenment and transcendent perception without knowing the law. Now, just in case you didn't get that, there can be no true enlightenment and transcendent perception without knowing the law. The process of bringing balance between ego and self is done through an application of natural law. I did not even know where to start, so I read the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution. It was said that it was based on biblical law, and I wanted to see if that was the case. After reading these documents, I was even more confused. It seemed pretty straightforward, but if they were the law of the land, then what is all this stupid stuff going on that had no reference in these documents? I went to the Bible to see if I could make sense of it. I had a basic hurdle I needed to overcome first, and this came from a study of what we know of as the Ten Commandments, and what the big deal was about them. I had had my dalliance with religion, and that was a brick wall, as I noticed that religion does not often understand the book it is so preoccupied with. I looked at the first commandment to see if I was violating it. Have no other gods before me. People told me that that was the establishment of monotheism, but for me it was important to understand why a supreme being would have to tolerate competition. Why not just bag them and be done with it? In understanding what is being referred to as gods, it was open. A god is any man, woman, or object, even mental construct that is not on, or the truth. When we give mental power to a fiction over us, then on gives it real power over us by honoring our will.
Wait a minute. Did that mean it was my choice? I did it? It was my responsibility and it was just my own stupidity? Yup. I became very interested in the things that I do that with. This led to another important aspect of law. If you ask permission, it's assumed you need permission. I needed to cut that out immediately. Soon I began discovering, almost magically, all the fictions I gave power over me. As soon as I realized it, they lost power. This led to a study of what sovereignty was and how it related to responsibility, rights, and the law of contracts. Later I would discover that much of my interaction in the universe was by contract, and I did not have a constructive definition of what a natural law contract is, or how a contract manifests power and force in physicality. Once I had a useful definition of natural law contract, I used my knowledge of contract to force a balance between self and ego. At the end of this document is the procedure that you will be led through to bring about this change. The consistent attenuation of ego leads to a permanent change in the way one perceives reality that will permit anyone to exist in a continual state of freedom and protection. Existing perceptual models do not allow for this state, and worse, actively hinder people from attaining it through the continual meddling of the ego in the perceptual filtering process. Right now, natural law applies in the universe that we perceive as reality. Reality is what's real. If fiction is real to me, then I can begin to see the problem I was facing. If I talked with the Easter Bunny every day, I would not trust me with anything important either. There are a number of different models of reality in general use today that curiously place us in a position of being at the mercy of an accidental universe and make us out to be slaves to the will of a supposed majority or criminal elite. For instance, the idea that we have absolute potent free will tends to remove purpose and meaning from our lives as we decide that all things are manifest by our will. If we/ego have no purpose to what we/ego do, then who does? Strangely, the idea of rigid fate tends to have the same effect. If one takes any sampling along the spectrum between absolute potent free will and completely scripted fate, then one misses the third option, in that reality is produced for the benefit of the observer, by proxy, such that it is continuous and tailored around the observer, and when the observer needs it for whatever they are here to learn and experience. The fate free will paradigms afford no protection from the majority or elite, and little in the way of peace of mind or freedom. I have tested both of these models, and they seem to intentionally hide important truths from us. How can we employ a tool that has been purposefully hidden from us? Frankly, we cannot. So it is up to us to find these tools before we can employ them. This will require rethinking of where we believe we are, what we believe we are, and why we believe we are here. The objective is to come to a knowing of what we are, knowing where we are, and knowing why we are here with a degree of certainty. No popular methodology can bring us to that objective, as it is up to us to go in a different direction. The nature of the contract. First, one must understand that we exist with the unlimited right to make contract. It is an essential part of us, and that does mean unlimited. This right can be exercised in any direction and to any perceived end. Most often, we as a species have contracted with ego to provide us with the illusion of potent free will, that is, being in charge of our own lives, in exchange for our blind obedience to its whims. This blindness extends to our near certainty that our ego is in fact our own true self. On has no reason to commune with you if you are not responsible for yourself. Sovereignty is granted by On, and when you willingly choose to receive it, you will always receive tangible, convincing notification because you need to know when it happens. Sovereignty includes responsibility of one's own body and comes with rights, and more importantly, responsibility for one's conduct. Because of sovereignty's reciprocal nature, it is granted through contract. The granting of sovereignty must be willingly asked for, as the granting authority, On, will not force the contract into existence that instantiates one's sovereignty, or presume a willingness by you where it has not been overtly expressed. When one creates a perceived victim by consequences resulting from an act, power is marshaled against the perceived perpetrator by On to make the victim whole at the perceived perpetrator's expense. This is the source of negative consequences in our lives. This can be particularly uncomfortable for those who make perceived victims of themselves. This principle permeates every level of our lives. Sovereignty will not be granted if you do not know the law required to protect your sovereignty. Lessons in natural law come first. The natural law of contract. All real enforceable contracts contain all of the four following elements. Enforceable means power will be used in the contract's execution and binding you or others to terms and conditions. If a supposed contract is lacking one or more of these, it is not enforced by On unless you are ignorant. A natural law contract must contain an offer. One has to first solicit or present a deal. Contract must contain an acceptance. Another has to accept the offer or deal. A contract must contain an exchange of real consideration. One does something if another does something, or gives something for something. Fiction does not count as real, and that is not to be forgotten. This has been the key to governmental, religious, and economic enslavement. The perpetrators cannot really do this in natural law without uncomfortable consequences, so they create a fictional entity or a fiction of law that can. The problem is we are confused and think these fictions in the minds of men are real and have real power over us. Ouch. A contract must contain a meeting of the minds. A contract must be between two minds. A piece of paper is only documentation, and by itself is not a contract, even though it may say it is. On has a mind, and therefore has the power to enter into contract and manifest the power of enforcement. Fictions of law do not have a mind. Real enforcement of natural law contract is administered as follows. All contracts are verbal. Your word is your bond. Break your word, and it is a shackle. Test it. All contracts are voluntary. You cannot be forced into a contract. A forced agreement will be ignored by on, and no power will be marshaled to enforce the terms. You cannot be compelled to relinquish your rights, but can, through confusion, trick yourself into voluntarily relinquishing your rights, i.e., enslave yourself. Conveniently, we are not taught this. All contracts are buyer beware. You are responsible for knowing what you're getting yourself into. You must have the reasonable means of discovering the terms of the contract. This is another way we lose to our ignorance. They seldom tell us what the terms are, and we seldom ask. Under law, if you behave as if a contract is in force, then it is presumed, even by on, that a contract indeed exists. If you act like you are bound to a contract, on recognizes the situation as if you are bound to a contract. It does not mean an actual contract is in force. It means it appears just like a contract is in force, because you do not know any better. If it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, and looks like a duck, then it's a duck. Our remedy is education. Other important natural law principles. The created is never more powerful than its creator. On creates the conscious you. On's more powerful than you. You create fiction. You are more powerful than fiction. Ignorance of the natural law is no excuse. If you know on, then you know the law. Clue alert. Say it slowly. Ignore unce. Those who are not in possession of all their faculties, or have turned away from on, are, under natural law, judged by courts as incompetent and subject to the prevailing lawful authority. To implement the Holy Grail contract, after the time on notifies you of your sovereignty, you are free to make contract with on by speaking the following. I will trust you without condition if you remove from me my ability to create a victim. The process of ego attenuation and rebalancing. Enlightenment. The level of your trust in on determines the number of steps in the process and how quickly they are implemented. It is entirely personal. It depends on where you are within your life experience and the strength of ego. It is difficult for narcissists, and this is why many are conditioned to express narcissistic tendencies. It is a means of making one's escape more challenging. If it was not a challenge, then why do it? The narcissist ego will look for any alternative to retain its perceived grip on potent free will. And this is the allure for ego-based enlightenment processes. Those are methods that are based on doing something like meditation, yoga, and martial arts.